To imagine you dance is to cross the highway like a child, not knowing length from breadth, and then to ask the question, were you woman or child, with your hand on that waist? Those are the opening lines of a much celebrated poem titled Dancing Girl Mohenjo-daro by poet and writer Sumana Roy. Sumana is elemental in her conception of the universe. Trees are never just trees, and water is never just water. For that matter, suffering or dukkha is not just suffering. Everything can be distilled to its essence. Her widely celebrated 2017 book, How I Became a Tree, heralded Sumana as a writer unusually attuned to realities beyond what seems real, and took her to the arboreal realm where she explored what it means to be a tree. That book quickly established her as a writer with a perspective unlike any of her generation. Her second book, her first novel Missing in 2018, reaffirmed her growing reputation as someone who perceives existence very differently. She followed up the novel with a book of poems titled Out of Syllabus in 2019, and the same year she also published My Mother's Lover and Other Stories. All this while she remains a prolific poet, published in India and around the world, as well as a widely published essayist and columnist. She chooses themes to write essays and columns that may never seem like themes to write about to most others, but she brings to bear a perspective on subjects such as dukkha that compels her readers to exult. Living and working out of the sub-Himalayan town of Siliguri, Shumana's voice now travels from the quiet foothills of the mighty Kanchenjunga to the world. Sumana Roy. Let me start with, tell me about the origin of your arboreal fascination, as it were.
Uh, I wish, like I could say I was born on 4th November 1974. I wish I could say that, that I started loving plants or feeling affection. Love seems too timid a word, given what I feel for plant life. And actually, all forms of life. Some
Right.
people might think that I care for the non human. It's not that. I think I come or I might have been formed by a culture. Um, Without my parents or grandparents having read or been exposed to the Upanishads or our ancients in any real way, but you know how it moves generationally. I might have been formed by a culture of thought and feeling, um, which believed that life was everywhere,
Right.
in stones, in rocks, in water, as you said in your Facebook post, the elements, plant life, animal life, the wall behind me, everywhere. I was telling a friend the other day when she pointed it out that say that sometimes when I, you know, close my laptop a bit, what's the word for it, harshly is a human word. I mean, you know what I mean, right? A bit
Right,
strong.
right, right.
What's the
You
word?
essentially slapping closet.
Yes, yes. So I immediately say sorry. And it's not something that I've been taught to say or whatever. I remember the first time I used an ATM machine many, many years ago, I found myself saying, thank you. It turned into a family joke. But now, retrospectively, as we realize so many things about us, I think I realized this, that I think everything has life. The understanding of life, and this I feel very strongly about, Mayank, and I hope you will understand this, that this very narrow understanding of life as one which exhibits growth and movement is a very Western understanding of life. And by
True.
Western also, I would say the last 2000 years of continental philosophy and now Anglo-American philosophy. Um, I think our ancients knew this. I might go back to the ancients a lot because I have been reading them in the last few months or so. It might have been exacerbated by a life in isolation and lockdown and so forth. But to return to your question, I think some people point out that it might owe to where I was raised in this very small town at the foothills of the Himalayas. But my brother, with whom I shared parents, a school, friends in the neighborhood, and almost everything else that comes with growing up together, does not feel the same way as I do. So it must be a peculiarity of temperament. Um, my interest, Mayank, and I think you would have understood this, and hence the slant of your question, is not botanical at all. You know that already
Right.
about me,
Right.
having known me for some time. Um, it comes from an affection, a place of desire, a place of imagination. How might it feel to live like a plant? And how might it feel to live like a ceiling fan, neglected in India, neglected for 6 months a year,
Right.
and so on and so forth. You mentioned this light source that I should have right behind the laptop, and I didn't have it. All these, and I it's not because you mentioned it, but I happened to buy it because my nephew suggested it.
Yes.
And while buying it, I couldn't set it up, and I asked my father for help. And he said, "Why do you need it?" And immediately I thought how neglected it would be once we return to the older form of life where we will not have to sit and interact with people in front of a screen. Obviously, I'm not going to carry this with me to a restaurant or a forest. I
Sure.
don't know whether I've answered your question, but yeah,
No,
I'm
no, you
glad I
have.
got.
No, this is exactly what I was expecting, and I'm glad you're living up to it already. Actually, I found it quite charming when you said you thanked the ATM machine. Uh, the
Sorry,
idea
say that
that
again.
the no, I found it quite charming that you even thanked the ATM machine. And let me tell you where I come from. I've always thought of the entire universe as something that is extraordinarily alive in every manifestation of it. So I'm not surprised that you would like to thank even your spectacles once in a while. Why not? So I understood. How much of the way you look at the world and write about it is influenced by your perpetual proximity to the Himalayas? For instance, say if you lived in a suburb in Mumbai, how would your writing might have turned out, or how do you think your sensibilities might have been different?
I'm sure it would have been different. I mean, we are all formed by geography, by history, by the people around us, by what we eat as we discover every morning, the next day after eating it. So everything around us forms us. This is a question I have been asked often, Mayank. And, this is again a question of the imagination. And I like to imagine, I like the question that comes to me: what would you be if the person I would be if I was born to a different set of parents,
Yeah.
a person I would be if I was growing up in Bombay, a person I would be if I didn't have a friend like Mayank Chaya, for instance.
Oh well.
These are all possibilities that you cannot really imagine. This is not, life is not a laboratory, and we can't really predict what would or what might have been at the other end of, this is equal to sign. One thing I do know, I would not say no because I don't really value knowledge that much. Um, your first, I think you began by saying that how much of was I formed by my proximity to the Himalayas? I think a lot now. At this age, at the age of 46, I began to feel this. I think after my mid 30s or so, some of it had to do with my chronic lack of professional ambition.
Hmm.
And I was scolded for this. I'm going to use a few Bengali words
Please
whose
do, please do, please do.
slang value you might not completely get, but I'll explain. So, I was not good at any kind of physical sport. I wasn't good at singing. I wasn't good at drawing or painting. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, was good at all of these.
I
The
see.
only thing I could do was, and he was a very beautiful child. He took after my mother, and relatives would come to our house and family friends, and they would pity me because I took after my father. My father, I hope he will, anyway, I say this to him, is not really a good looking man. So my mother used to be very beautiful. So those kind of complexes get to you when you are a child. um, and so the only thing I could do was study. I read a lot. Whatever I could lay my hands on, I would read. So the reason, that I came first in class wasn't because I was particularly intelligent or studious. It's because it's the only thing I could do. And I didn't realize that it required a lot of effort to do that. It
Hmm.
also helped that my friends, the people I was in class with, or the people in my neighborhood, were not interested in studies, so it wasn't really difficult to come first. It's a small town, laid back, lacking in ambition, as I said. Um, but my husband, for instance, grew up in the same town. Um, and it's not that, I mean, he's 6 years older, but he was formed by a different kind of circumstances, or maybe the family, that he is very professionally ambitious. um, and so things began to happen to me after my university degree. I got a job. All of this happened by accident, and it was not, I would say I was very fortunate, touch wood, that I didn't really work very hard for it. I see how difficult it is to get a job now, with the kind of degree that I had, not from a fancy university, a
Right.
provincial university such as this one. And I see that I've had it very easy at that point of time. But after having got the job, and it was possible to get a job with something called a NET, a
Hmm.
national eligibility test that you had to take to become a lecturer in a college or university. I still did not have a PhD degree. It took me quite a while to get a PhD degree. Again, not because I wasn't, uh, let me put it this way, it was just because I was ignoring it. I did everything else apart from writing or working on the PhD. And at that point of time, from that point of time, people around me, including my parents, certainly my father, began to give up on me. That this person who had done so well in school and college, not living up to their potential, the kind that, your parents always worry about you.
Right.
Uh, it also came from a place, a surrounding, where it became a kind of attack against me. It would come, in a very well intentioned way. I still remember, and you remember, you don't remember praise, I'm sure, Mayank, but we remember the words that cause us hurt a lot.
Right.
And I was called a kabbalist. It's a neologism even in Bangla.
I see.
Um, Derived from, a professor's wife called me that. It derived from the word kablano, which is you bite into something, you bite into something else, you bite into something else. So I was a kabbalist who was doing lots of things, but
Right.
lacked focus, not doing anything. They did not quite understand that, I liked to do a lot of things. I
Right.
wasn't really professionally ambitious. I mean, in having that focus, having a career path, and all of that. So um, later on, when I began to write, I would start writing something, then give it up. It's part of my temperament even now. There are more unfinished things on my laptop
Right.
than there
Absolutely.
are things that I've finished. I'm sure it's true of you as well. If
Right.
I know you, you have that kind of temperament, the reason I like you. uh, uh, I mean, not the only reason, but one of the many reasons.
How nice.
uh,
Yeah.
so later on, I began to see that the friends that I had, and friends is a word I use with a kind of miserliness.
Hmm.
I might know a lot of people, but I have very few friends. And it owes as much to my shyness as it does to my temperament. I mean, I like being by myself a lot. But, as the years began to grow on me, I would say, and I entered my 40s, I began to notice a pattern in the kind of people who had stayed on as my friends. They were people who were lacking almost completely in professional ambition.
Right.
Um, and the fact that, they were happy to eat a good mangsho bhat,
Uh-huh.
mutton curry and rice,
Right.
take their children and family for an outing, even to Darjeeling or Digha, the places, or Puri, the places Bengalis go to.
Right.
My parents, who wanted me to just get a job, who did not want me to do very well in that traditional understanding of very well.
Right.
All of this then began to fall into a pattern, which brings me to the first half of your question. I, I began to see that all of this was indulged by the character of growing up in an unremarkable town at the foothills of the Himalayas.
Oh, okay.
It's called the chicken's neck. It's not remarkable. People don't remember Shiliguri. They just
Right.
use it, to go to Darjeeling, to Sikkim, to the northeast, the northeastern states of India.
Right.
So if people came here, they would just they were not interested in us, our relatives. They just wanted to go to the terrace to be able to see the Kanchenjunga on a good November day. Uh, or, just the scenic beauty. That was the phrase that was used for us. So, this sense of being unremarkable that came to me not only from the friends that I had in my long life and who
Mhm.
continue to be my friends, who don't care. So one of my friends, for instance, saw me being asked to sign a book. You know, a book. It was how I became a tree. And so she said, मेरे घर में भी बहुत सारे किताब है, कभी आके साइन कर देना.
Really?
Yeah, so and I laughed and I feel grateful. Someone else would have been hurt. So when I narrated it to other friends or other people who are writers, or even my husband, I mean, they were like, they didn't take it as a joke, but for me, it was like, this is why she continues to be my friend.
Right.
Uh, these people who, the sense of being, Mayank, I wrote a story called The New Provincials. I did not know I was a provincial until someone pointed it out to me when I was 25 or so. And it was used as a pejorative.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so until then, it's like, I think it was Adichie who wrote that she did not know that she was black until she came to America.
Right.
I can't remember exactly. So it's like that. I didn't know I was a provincial until someone from a city. It happened to be Calcutta, which thinks of the entire world as provincial compared to it, of course, as you know already.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that word stuck in my head. And what had made me a provincial? What had formed me? And why had so few people devoted any kind of critical attention to it? For instance, India is studied in terms of, I'm concentrating on literature, in terms of, say, post colonial studies. But you would know, I mean, knowing you would just, oh God, keep me away from the term.
Right.
Yeah, but even then you would know that so little, almost nothing actually, negligible attention has been paid to an understanding of provincial literatures, of provincial culture, and so on
Yeah.
within these. Because the idea of post-colonial studies was formed, these collectives were formed by elites in North America, in England,
True.
and their disciples and devotees in other metropolitan centers of the world. So I feel unremarkable, and I don't say this with any kind of humility, Mayank. If I was, I would tell you.
No,
I
I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, so this sense of being unremarkable and this sense of satisfaction that I get from,
Right.
from not having the pressure to be remarkable.
Yeah.
I think so. I wrote this story called The New Provincials, and that is where I was coming to. So I thought I was an old provincial, and I could see that my father had passed so many traits of being a provincial to me. He had inherited it from writers and artists he had admired, and so on. Uh, Even Bangla literature is a Calcutta-based literature. You ask any Bengali, and I know you
Right.
do know quite a few Bengalis,
I do. Yeah.
all of them educated people, as I see from your Facebook post. If you were to call them right now and say, tell me the names of your favorite Bengali writers, and I can tell you all of them would be based out of Calcutta, with the exception of Tagore, who was born there, but then, was
Right.
formed by Shantiniketan and Shilai Daho.
Right.
But the new provincials, and this is a category I see after the internet, wants to be famous.
Right.
Uh, you know, because the spotlight was never on us, the spotlight was always on Kanchenjunga. The tourists came to see Kanchenjunga, not us.
Not. Yeah.
We loved we grew up with the idea of never wanting the spotlight. You don't miss what you don't have.
Right.
Um, it wasn't any kind of deprivation or poverty. Um, but this new generation has been formed by the internet, seeks fame, and so on.
Right.
So it's been a very long answer,
No, no, no.
but
I
I would
understand.
say
No,
yes,
it's not.
I was formed by the Himalayas, by living in this very small town.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting you should mention what you call your chronic lack of ambition. I, I find it somewhat laughable for the simple reason that anyone who could write across the spectrum that you write on calls for a great deal of literary conceit and ambition. It's not easy to produce what you produce. I don't think people realize what it means to write something of quality on a consistent basis across a wide range of interests. And I've read a lot of what you write. It is extraordinary.
Thank you,
It is
Mayank.
it is ruminant, almost reflexively ruminant. You always see beyond the obvious, and in the process, perhaps you run the risk of being esoteric from time to time. I was That question came a little later, but since it's come up, I might as well ask you, as a writer, as a poet, as a novelist, as a columnist, do you fear that you might run into this bit of an issue where you become a little more esoteric than you should be?
Uh, the trigger for, let me try to answer both the questions together. Uh, the first wasn't a question, it was a
Right.
statement that how can someone like me then want to write without being triggered by ambition. I think love and desire are stronger than ambition.
Yeah.
Love and ambition is ambition is a quality or characteristic is a quality that is characteristic of the social world. Love and desire come from a deeper place, from the spiritual, from the psychological, from the emotional. And
Absolutely.
so my writing comes from, I'm aware of this, that yesterday one of my closest friends asked me, why have you taken on so much since it is affecting your health? Um, and I told him it's because I want to. It doesn't come from, and he knows me well enough to not ask, that what are you doing it for? Are you going to, whatever, the social
Right.
things that
Right.
attain ambition. So he said, yes, I understand that. And I said, I'm greedy. Again, greed, a more spiritual and emotional need, not
Absolutely.
dictated, by materialism, that, I want to get this prize or be published. So much of what I write, I don't even share with the world. It might sound very cute to say, as so many of us do, I write to make a sense of the world. In my case, I do write to make a sense of the world, but I also write, and this I have been become aware of only very recently. I also write to protect myself from the world,
Interesting.
um, by which I mean this kind of noise around us all the time, obviously amplified by social media, but also other things, in the workplace that I am in, where there are so many expectations of you, as any workplace does on the employee. Even in the familial sphere, the things expected of you, until there comes a point where you feel emptied out. And I think I write to keep that part to myself. That is, again, I'm using a word not used anymore. Sacred. That part is sacred to
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah, it is very important to me.
Yes.
About esoteric, um, whether
And I'm
you
sorry
can.
to interrupt, but I mean it as a compliment because I read esoteric literature all the time. I mean, I almost knee-jerk read Bhartihari, for instance, for no reason, or Vairagya Shatakam, or even Kalidas. A lot of interesting constructs in these fantastic literature. So that's where I was coming from.
Um, I think to be esoteric, I would need to be slightly more evolved and mature person than I am at
Absolutely.
this moment. Uh, Hopefully, it will happen. I really hope it does. But then one can't will these things to happen, as you know.
Yeah.
What I have been told from time to time is that a word that has been used is idiosyncratic. Again, none of this comes in a premeditated way, Mayank. It's just how
Right.
I live and experience the world. My husband, when we fight, sometimes we fight a lot, but sometimes during these conversations, sometimes he will tell me in exasperation, why did I marry a poet? So because some analogy would come up, and one day I just told him, you are like a chingri mach, and chingri mach is prawns or shrimps, as you know.
Right.
And both of us love it, and he thought it was a compliment. And then I kept repeating it, and he was like, he continued to think it was a compliment until, and I was angry that why wasn't he reacting to that? Because what I meant was, just as shrimps or prawns don't have a spine, you
Right.
put them in oil and they shrivel, or
True.
turn circular. That's what I meant. But he didn't get it. So there are times when he feels exasperated as well. But it's just the way I think, Mayank. It might have to do with being very alone as a child. Uh,
Yeah.
though I was growing up, with my brother and playing cricket and all of that, but also a feeling, never feeling completely at home anywhere.
Right.
Uh, Even when I'm with those I love and care for very much, there's a part of myself that that will not, that is resistant to osmosis, I would say.
Right.
uh, so I think that self is, from, is like that bird, those two birds that the
Right.
participant observer thing, I won't repeat. So it might come from there, but I would say it might have been precipitated by acute aloneness, where you see the world peculiarly as your own. And But I also want to say here, someone said that, it's very metaphorical, how I see the world. And so it is possible that, Mayank, every metaphor, every simile, every analogy is a comparative. So
Yeah.
if I say, Mayank, I am as fat as an elephant, immediately that simile brings in another world into it, the world
Right.
of the elephant. When you think of the elephant, you think of an African jungle or forest or a zoo. So within the tiny space of that sentence, you have been able to people it with the I that I was, but also with so much more,
Right.
with the elephant and its surroundings and their
Exactly.
surroundings. So I think that looking back at myself retrospectively, it might be that
Okay.
idiosyncratic or metaphorical way of looking at the world might have come from the desire to
Right.
populate it with other things and other sensibilities and people.
You know, I've thought about it a bit while before I came for this interview. You are more like an impressionist painter. Uh, you capturing impressions at that particular moment, which is transient. It's ephemeral almost. You know, someone like Monet, for instance, would would be so frenzied to capture seconds of light that he would go completely insane if somebody disturbed him. My sense from reading what you write is that you quickly want to capture what's going on and yet make it last. That's my impression. I could be completely analyzing it, but that's the way I feel.
Uh, Thank you. Yes, as I don't think all any of us who are writing or trying to create, as you would know from your own practice, Mayank, are completely, or I would say entirely, conscious of what we want to do. A bit
Right.
of it we might be conscious of. We're triggered by something. Yes, one of these is my desire to capture the present. Therefore, I don't. I'm not particularly fond of the historical novel or the
Hmm.
science fiction novel because they come a bit solidified to me.
Right.
The science fiction is like an obverse of the historical novel, right? It's just
True.
set in
True.
the future, but you're imagining it as one does a period film almost. And I think you mentioned the Impressionists. Absolutely, I feel very very close to them, uh,
Wonderful. Yeah.
but also but also, and I know I can say this without having to explain myself because you've written a book on the Dalai Lama. It comes to me from Buddhism,
All right.
from the philosophy of flux of Anitya.
Kshanika.
Gayatri, a friend of mine, uh, her book on Anitya is coming out next month, and I was reading it, and I just, there were times I was like, oh, this is about me. This is exactly how I feel.
Right.
So, the fact that, when someone says in this aphoristic manner, this too shall pass, it is a belief in Anitya, that, whether
True.
good or bad, it is going to change. And so I
Absolutely.
think, again, intergenerationally conditioned by the culture around us, that um, it is the present. Also, I think, Mayank, the present is the most difficult to write. And
True.
when I give writing exercises, now that I have to teach creative writing to earn a living, um, when I give writing exercises about writing time, I always tell my students that I find it impossibly difficult to write the present.
Right.
It's a cliche. As soon as you've written the present, it's become the past. uh,
Absolutely.
how do you capture the sense of the present? It's so much easier for the cinematographer, for the film director, for the musician. Every moment of the sound is a moment in the present. So though
Absolutely.
you know that yes, I have to go back to the summer of Rimjim Gire Savan, and I can do this when I am in the second stanza in the Sanchari or the Antara. I can just be there. I know
Right.
I have to go back to the home of the summer, but
Right.
even then at that moment. But literature is not like that. Writing is not like that.
It's not. Yeah.
Writing is so difficult that, as soon as I've written something, it's become something of the past. It feels
Absolutely.
curated, and using the present tense, doesn't help because, So much of contemporary American writing, as you would know yourself, begins with stories like you come into the room, you see the smoke. All of this is written in the present tense, but it
Right.
immediately creates a sense of the past.
Absolutely.
Using the present tense is not going to help us create the sense of the
Not
present.
at
So
all.
it's
Not at
very
all.
difficult to write. The Impressionists knew that. And what did they do? They realized, and again, I wish our students were taught all these things. They were competing at that moment in history, they were competing with photography, which was emerging as a new art form.
True.
Until then, the study of the portraiture, where you could get, the 2D image of this person in in their completeness or entirety,
Right.
whatever form it might be. And the Impressionists realized that if they had to compete with the camera, it would always be the camera that would win.
Right.
So what did they do? They, I'm not an art history student. This is my personal understanding of Impressionism. That they decided to focus on the moment, and they decided that it would be about the fragment, the
Right.
fragmentary.
Absolutely.
We would not get the whole. We would just get the shimmer on the water. We would not get that epic of the sea, the epical element of the sea.
Right.
So this I have taken from them, and
Wonderful. Yeah.
yeah. So and try to import that understanding to my writing.
How nice. So that means I wasn't off the target there. Trees are so locationally fixed in one spot and yet so mobile within them. To me, they feel like lovely, non judgmental observers of the rest of sentient life. What do they feel like to you? For as long as I remember, I have had a very weirdly uh, drawn relationship with trees. I've been a tree hugger without realizing it from my childhood. So, what do they mean to you? To me, they look like just non judgmental observers of the rest of sentient life.
I think I came to them initially from that space. So as you know, that my interest wasn't really botanical. It
Right,
was propelled by a sense of desire, a sense of imagination, of affection, of becoming. The reason it's called How I Became a Tree. And I
right,
want to say in an aside that I think when literary history is looked at, say 30, 40, 50 years from now, uh, people will begin to notice how many women, um, without being related to each other, without actually taking it from each other very independently, were thinking of writing narratives or wrote narratives about becoming. I mean,
right.
whether it's someone, um, a negligible person like me, an unremarkable, so not negligible, an unremarkable person like myself, who's writing How I Became a Tree, or whether it's Michelle Obama, whose book is called Becoming.
Right.
There is a philosophy of, I would say, a feminist philosophy of becoming that is acting as an agent in through all of us.
Yeah.
Geeta Hariharan's book, I think, I can't remember the name, How I Became a Tide or a Wave, it came out 2 years ago, has that word. There are many, many. I have made notes of this and probably will write about it at some point of time. That what is this new feminist consciousness of becoming? And, becoming was denied to women. For a long time. I mean,
True.
as you know, we were conceived to be this person and we were to be that. This
Absolutely.
ideal of becoming was allowed to men who could become saints, who could go to the forest and, indulge their spiritual ambition of becoming and so on. It was denied to the woman. I mean,
True.
think of Siddhartha. His is a trajectory of becoming
It is.
from the yeah, and that would have been denied to his wife. We would be reading about this terrible mother who left her son at home at midnight. So
Absolutely. I agree.
yeah, yeah. But about trees, I think I was going through a very difficult time in my life. I mean,
Mhm.
every moment is difficult, I suppose, but retrospectively, again, I was bored. I was not bored. I'm never bored, touch wood. Um, I was disenchanted by the human social.
Mhm.
I by everyone around me, and I was too timid to contemplate death, or maybe I am too life loving to consider death as an option.
Mhm.
um, i I wanted to live like someone else. Again, see how I use the word like as I'm telling,
Sure.
so I suppose my imagination is, I suppose, more comparative than I allow myself to think it to be. um, So I wanted to live like someone who was outside the emotion economy
I see.
of human relationships, which I saw as based on transactionality. You, who, no matter with whom you had a
Right.
human relationship, it was transactional. So
Right.
I've said this many times before, but never to you. So let me paraphrase myself. I remember it was a summer day many years ago, would have been 10, probably longer. And it was summer like it is now, and the ceiling fan was moving above my head like it is at this moment. I think
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you can hear the sound in the background, yeah, that
Right.
Indian ceiling fan sound. Um, and said, okay, maybe I want to live like a ceiling fan. And then suddenly it struck me, but it has no agency. Someone has to switch it off or turn it on. Uh, I did not want to lose my agency.
Right.
Then I thought, okay, maybe I want to live like a dog. And anyone who's lived like a dog knows that a dog is not outside the emotion economy. You come back from work, you come back from anywhere, that kind of
Right.
emotions at work. And then a few years passed, and I remember I was very unwell, and I was in this room on the bed, which is to my left at this moment. And I was lying down. It was a summer day, very bright day, and there's a papaya tree, papaya plant, right outside the bedroom window. And the papaya leaves are very beautiful, as you know.
They are.
It they resemble, it's almost like a gigantic palm.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and the shadow of those leaves were playing on the ceiling. And believe me, Mayank, I'm not going to say that it was epiphanic, but it did change something in me. And I thought, I was feeling so unwell, but the shadows of the papaya leaves dancing on the ceiling suddenly make me feel better.
I
But what
see.
have I given to the papaya plant? Nothing.
True.
Nothing at all. It had grown on its own, it was flowering on its own, and so on. At that point of time, I thought, I want to live like a tree. I want to become a
Oh, how
tree.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a few years passed, and I obviously didn't share it. It's such a ridiculous thought that it's not shareable, actually. A few years passed, and I saw that, the desire never went away. I tried to live like a tree. Whenever I would be sad, I would tell myself, it's only because I cannot live like a tree. It's only because I could not live like a tree that,
Right.
I was suffering. And so much of philosophy in the Indian subcontinent, as you know, has been prompted by trying to understand suffering,
Right.
whether it's Buddhism or, and I keep referring to Buddhism because of your intimate
Sure.
acquaintance with it. And then, I began to look for all of this was done completely in secret. Even, the KGB wouldn't have found out. And then I thought to myself, am I the only abnormal person who wants to live like a tree? Or are there other people as well? And that is when I began to actually look, it sounds a bit self-aggrandizing to call it a quest, but I'm unable to think of another word at this moment, so please forgive me for using that word. It became almost like a quest, a passion to
Right.
discover people who had wanted to live like a tree. Why did Siddhartha have to walk all this way and come and sit under a tree, to get enlightenment, as
Absolutely. Yeah.
the as we anglophone world calls it. Then Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, who, as you know, wrote Pothir Pachali, the novel on which
Sure.
Ray's film is based, uh, he studied in Calcutta and then spent his 20s, many years of his life, of his youth, in a forest in what was then Bihar and is now Jharkhand, and how it transformed him, how this novel called Aranyak, which takes
Mhm.
his name from one of the Upanishads, the
Right.
Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So that then the scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose, who I saw was referring to plant life always, whether in Bangla or in English in his research work, as infants. And
Right.
somehow I found out that he and his wife, like myself, did not have biological children of their own. So they were either childless or child free, whichever way you choose to call it. And then other writers raise, non botanical plants, many other people, but also very unremarkable people such as myself, someone who had wanted to get married to a tree, someone, a woman in England who had had sex with a tree, who said she had had sex with a tree,
Right.
people writing love letters to trees in Melbourne. So, and then discovering these people, and I thought, I want to write. So, someone called it a memoir. It's not actually a memoir, it's not a book about myself. It's about a group of people such as myself
Right.
who exhibited the desire to live like a tree in different
Absolutely.
ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I forests and therefore trees have again become intrinsic to our survival because of climate change. Do you think this rather utilitarian approach to a form of life so varied and so magical is helpful? I mean, trees are far more than just something that will save us from climate change.
I'm so grateful you said that. Very grateful, Mayank. I absolutely dislike the vocabulary that attends,
Right.
save trees. As I keep saying to students, even in creative writing class, no one has ever saved a tree because they found a board saying save trees pinned onto or nailed onto a tree. None of us have
Right.
ever done that. So, save trees or green planet and all those bureaucratic words, they will not make us save trees. I think we will save any form of the living only if we have an intimate relationship with them. It's one thing to read in the newspaper 23 children dead.
Hmm.
It's another thing to discover this about a cousin, a nephew, a niece, a sibling with a name, that this person has died, and because of the intimacy and affection. So what needs to change are actually, I think, two things. I'm very glad you brought this up. One is the relationship has to shift from this bureaucratic understanding of plant life in this very utilitarian narrative that has been given to us. You know, they give us this, the air to breathe, and they give us food. That didn't,
Right.
that hasn't stopped us from doing anything. We won't. I think we don't eat our pets, right? I mean,
No.
even if so, if you can think of plant life in that way, that just as you can't eat your dog, just as you don't kill your dog, similarly you cannot kill that plant out there. It is
Right.
very difficult. It is easier to to think of this relationship with a dog because we are related by the optics of blood.
Right.
It will start, a dog will start to bleed. A plant doesn't bleed in that sense.
Right.
Something about our biological conditioning, makes us feel revolted when we encounter blood. In a way,
Right.
it doesn't when we see, for instance, uprooted trees, even after a cyclone, for
Yeah.
instance. That the other thing that has to change is this Hollywood like understanding of the environment. You if you keep feeding us, by you I don't mean you as a representative
Sure.
of
Sure.
Hollywood. If anyone keeps starts feeding us apocalyptic narratives about you don't do this to trees or this will happen, at one point of time we become numb to that fear.
Right.
Just as as we've seen it play out during COVID. One person dies, you're scared. Two, three, four, until it becomes a number. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
the sense of the apocalypse that is being used again by bureaucratic machinery to distill fear into us is not going to help. What will
Right.
help, and again, this I think we might learn something from our ancients, is this, um, how they are family. So, yes, when the Buddha says, please don't cut this tree, um, don't cut its branches, and he represents it in the language of the living. So,
Right.
it's not, and I have said this in many places, but it's very difficult to prove this, that it is not a coincidence that Jagadish Chandra Bose was the person who says that plants were living. He was formed by a culture, by Buddhism, by the Upanishads, by the Brahmos, by the Vaishnavites, who
Absolutely.
saw
Yeah.
living in it. It could not have come from America. It could not
No.
have come from Europe. It would
True.
have had to come from a non Western place. And so, those narratives, those discourses, those ideas have to be brought back into our pedagogical understanding. Um, and, in the way we live. My
Right.
father's village, they did not have this concept of pets. There was no pet food. Whatever was left over was given to the dogs or the cat, something to the cows, something to the hens, the other birds. So, this idea of coexistence that has disappeared from our lives. Now we get one dog at home, give all our attention to that particular dog, and, think of no one else.
Right.
To be able to, just as activism teaches us to be able to think of others as ours, to think of not only the pet you have at home but at all forms of the living, to expand the idea of the living.
Right.
That too, I think we will have a lot less waste, Mayank. If we think, oh, I have to throw this, I have to discard this, we'll have a lot. I know I'm beginning to sound like some kind of pop spiritual thinker, but this is the way I cannot think of any other
No, I understand.
way,
No, you're
actually.
right. You're right about it. I know I've already taken a lot of your time. I have a couple more questions. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all, please, Mayank.
I read somewhere that mathematics is something you would have been interested in pursuing. Is that right?
Say that again, please. I lost you.
No, I read somewhere that mathematics is something that interested you as something that you might pursue as a career or even as
Yes,
an interest.
yes,
That's right, right?
yes, it is. Very, I don't know
Within
whether
that context,
mathematics. Sorry.
no, within that context, you said something quite remarkable that numbers have no space for metaphor because numbers are obviously quite austere. There is no ambiguity to a number. A two is
Yes,
a
it's a
two,
more
three is a
perfect
three.
language in that sense.
Right, right.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what's your draw towards mathematics?
Okay, I'll answer both the questions. I think numbers can be metaphorical,
Okay,
immensely so. For
okay.
instance, in this poem that all of us were taught in, did you go to school in India, Mayank?
I did, I did.
um, this poem that we were taught in middle school, I wandered lonely as a child. The daffodils, the poem that is called Daffodils by Wordsworth. Wordsworth didn't call it the
Right.
daffodils, of course. And the first stanza ends with 10,000 saw I at a glance.
Right.
Uh, so obviously he did not count 10,000.
No,
That's
no,
a
I
metaphor.
understand.
Yeah. So, poets do use numbers. Now, in the age of fake news, numbers are metaphorical anyway, Mayank. You know that. Uh, and to answer your question, I'm not sure whether it can be called mathematics. I am obsessed with numbers.
I see.
Um, Again, I think now that it might have come from my aloneness.
Okay.
I come from a very middle class background, and there were not enough books at home. And my brother was, as he grew older, he was away, with his friends. Both my parents were working, and I I had a very conservative upbringing. So
Mhm.
being at home most of the time, unless one was in school or college, also because of my temperament, I spent a lot of time playing inside my head, as it were.
Okay.
Um, I came up with theories of numbers. It seems
Really?
ridiculous to say this. Yes, until I went to school for 2 years in Calcutta for classes 11th and 12th, because then there were no English medium ISC schools in Shiliguri for girls at that point. So my father sent me there to boarding school, to a hostel in
Mhm.
Calcutta. And because, again, as I told you, because I'd done well in the sciences and mathematics, he put me in what is called the science stream in India. And there I had an absolutely wonderful mathematics teacher called Mrs. Khan.
Hmm.
I was very shy, and it's a high performance school where people from not only Calcutta but all across the state and the northeastern states also, the first girls from every school going there and so on. Mrs. Khan realized that I wasn't a flamboyant person. I was shy. I was always hiding. And, this is one thing I have tried to learn from her, to, s- to help shy students speak, even in private. So she took me aside one day and said that I have a feeling that you love maths. And
I see.
I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that, not even my parents. I mean, uh, and then I don't know what it was about her intuition or whatever. Then I began to share with her my speculations about different theories of numbers.
I
And
see.
she forced me to write about two of them for, the imagination is limited. It wasn't the age of the internet. Otherwise, she might have
Right.
asked me to send it to some professor somewhere. And she said, you
Right.
must write about it in your school magazine. So, this theory of divisibility of numbers, where you know that, right? I
Right.
mean, you
Right.
can just, yeah. So, there was no theory of divisibility of the numbers 7 and 13. There still
Right.
isn't.
No.
And I had come up with a formula where you could look at a number and say,
I
it's
see.
still there in my school magazine somewhere. The 13 one, I don't remember, but the 7 one, anyway, I can send it to you.
Please,
Since then,
I'm very interested. Maybe you're on
I,
to something.
I will share with you. But
Please.
also, these are all useless skills. By useless, I mean completely inconsequential and of having no value. So as you speak Mayank, I can, you say Mayank and I know there are 6 letters. When you
Right.
speak, I am adding up. I can, as you speak, so 10. I am adding
Amazing.
up. So I can do this,
That's
very,
amazing.
very fast. Yeah. So it's a completely useless skill, but it's just playing with numbers. I think I was doing that to entertain myself as a child. So I have an affinity for numbers. I do not usually touch wood, forget numbers. I remember numbers of taxis. I have
Okay.
boarded and so on, and all of that. It's completely non-utilitarian.
No,
But yes, people
here
love
is an idea. There is a book on numbers sitting in you as I speak to you. You should. It will, just as trees became an interesting subject to write about, maybe as a sequel to how I became a number. Because I think
full of
you
numbers.
obviously have thought about it a great deal, and
I have.
I'm
I
fairly
still do.
certain. Yeah, I think you should. It's my suggestion. You should really go for it.
I know my closest friend has told me, even if you don't write a book, write a long essay. No one has read your school
I see.
magazine. Put it out there, and at least see. Test the validity of
Exactly.
what. Yeah, but I just feel so because it seems like an
No,
useless
you
skill to
should.
have. I'm obsessed with
No,
palindrome, for
I think
instance.
that right. No, the trick is to let yourself go. I think you should let yourself go. Don't be hamstrung by your inherent shyness. The idea is think of you as an artist. See, all painters, for instance, all great painters or all great musicians, or even all
Yes,
great scientists,
I
one
agree.
fundamental common feature that I found is that they just let themselves go. They did not let anything stand in the way. They just decided, even if it sounds insane, I'm going to do it. I think
True.
maybe you're really onto something. So, anyway, to wrap up, last couple of things. One is I read your essay about Dukkha. Uh, you wrote a pretty long piece on Dukkha.
Yes.
Is Dukkha or Dukkha, in your mind, Gautam Buddha's Dukkha or something distinct from that? Because he has talked in terms of the Four Noble Truths. You
Yes.
all know about it. I don't have to talk about that. But I am coming to you from a very different vantage point. I've never understood almost 95, 98% of human emotions in my life. I have generally feigned reactions throughout my life. In fact, the joke was that I was Mr. Spock before Mr. Spock was Mr. Spock in Star Trek. Uh, and I'm sincere about it. So even when you see a show like The Big Bang Theory, for instance, if you look at the character of Sheldon, I tell my daughter often that it's spooky how much of that represents what I was as a child. So I
What
don't
does she say?
understand Dukkha intuitively. I don't really understand it. So what is your understanding of Dukkha?
Um, I was going for how I pronounce it in Bangla, Dukkha or
Right,
Dukkha. Yeah.
right,
Um, yeah, the Buddha. That is why a little while ago, in response to something I said, that so much of our philosophy in the Indian
right,
subcontinent has been triggered by the need to find a cure for suffering, for sadness.
right.
Suffering has had different words, even sorrow, sadness, dukkha, um, all of that. It's I just think that in this essay, I wrote it quite a few years ago and was reluctant to share it, and then eventually forced myself to. Mayank, this comes again from both an intellectual and an emotional space. I find that I began teaching, let me just start from there. I began teaching the rasa theory to my
Hmm.
students from the last semester. I,
Okay.
I offered to teach it, and the head of the department very kindly allowed me to, um, because I think there is a great lack in our pedagogy. Um, we are never taught how to, for instance, I say this all the time, that your employer will give you leave if you break your leg, but not your heart.
Right.
So this privileging, or I would say in this hierarchy where emotions are just, so the woman is weak because she exhibits her emotions. Association of emotions with a kind of vulnerability, with weakness, and so on. We're not supposed to show our emotions and all of that. Look at author photos on the covers of books. No one is smiling in them. They are so bland. Look at the passport photos. No
Yeah.
show of emotions. I mean, look at these genres we are surrounded by. You are not supposed to, you might
Right.
have had a stomach upset, but you're not supposed to say that in the boardroom. I mean, why? So, one of the things that I wanted to bring into pedagogy was how to write emotions and why we are so scared of writing emotions. And
Mhm.
again, returning to the ancients, to Bharat Muni and later to Abhinavagupta, to the Natya Shastra, to the Rasa theory, to what Sheldon Pollock translates as art hyphen emotion. So,
Right.
but I also wanted to extend the idea of the rasa to outside art as well. How does it impact our lives? Why is it missing from our teaching apparatus, from pedagogy? From why is there no minister?
Right.
Who kind of of emotional welfare or whatever. We don't even have a minister of mental health, but that's another thing. Also, I don't like this category mental health very much, because not because I have anything against it. All of us are suffering from something or the other. It's just the manner in which mental health has become industrialized, like so many other things, and is now
Right.
given to us in this manner where it's very industrial, like education is, for instance. The
It
same
is.
thing
Yeah.
for all. Yeah. So the essay Dukkha came from my personal emotions, of course. I was also trying to write emotions. How do I explain this? It's, when we write, Mayank, often we go back, we edit it. If you're writing, because you're a journalist, you would know this far better than I do. You find the central argument, the thesis statements connecting each other. So
Right.
you are actually, um, you become an employee of the ratiocinative tradition of writing,
Right.
right? This is an argument. You're writing an argumentative essay. Surely there should be a space for other forms of writing where you make an argument, but the argument does not. Why are we living in such a head heavy culture?
I agree.
Uh, so why we can make our arguments also through feelings, not necessarily through the head. So in this essay in particular, and because you've read it, I'm taking the liberty to be able to explain myself better. You will notice that they are disconnected. The sections, the paragraphs, they are disconnected. They are
Right.
written at different points of time when I was experiencing dukkha.
Right.
Also, I was trying to break away from the hand me down ratiocinative argumentative essay that has become the mainstay of writing pedagogy and the MFA programs. I, I I am quite certain, and I felt
Hmm.
emboldened reading the Bhakti poets, their rejection of knowledge that comes only through scholarship, their valuing of knowledge that comes through the bodies. The way they offer,
Right.
they're incapable of offering their bodies to the gods that they love. I wouldn't even say worship, that they love. um, so I was emboldened by that, and I want to eventually write about all the nine rasas, all the nine emotions, um, in this manner. I was also acting on intuition that I think the emotions are related to the elements. That's why I
Right.
was very, very moved by your Facebook post that you had spotted it.
Well,
Uh, uh,
thank you.
yes.
Yeah.
So that's the connection. I hope I've
Yeah.
answered.
I mean, you do tend to distill things down to their elements, and which is a great skill. I don't think I don't know of any other writer of your generation in India who does what you do. And I say this as purely as a factual statement. It's not. attempt at praising, although it is a praise, but I see around and I find that you are perhaps the only one who does what you do. And I think
But
it
you realize that this also, because emotions are marginalized in this
right,
hierarchy that we live in, where writing about wars, matters of national or international
true.
importance. So there are these hierarchies as well.
Yeah,
So writing about emotions will automatically become marginalized as well. So
no,
you
true,
understand
true.
what I'm trying
No,
to
I
get
do,
at.
I do. To wrap up the last bit, brevity is the hallmark of poetry. You are a poet at heart, but I think you're more ruminant than poetic. That's how I see you. Uh, how do you then become a prose writer, which necessarily requires a great deal of elaboration? How do you balance the two?
I don't I don't really make a distinction between the two. I
Mhm.
think whether I'm writing a poem, and I inevitably write a lyric poem because I have no talent or ambition for the epic.
Mhm.
I use the lyric as a kind of counterpoint to the epic, of course. Um, I think my investment as a person and consequently as a writer and a reader is essentially in the poetic. So it could come in the form of a visual image, it could come as a piece of sound,
Right,
could be in prose, it could be in verse. Um, the subject always decides what I want to write on. In this poem, for instance, that you quoted in your Facebook post, Mayank, um, the Mohenjo-daro poem
right.
about the dancing girl,
Yeah,
I it came to me as a poem because I found this girl's hands on her waist. That thought, it's a kind of, I was struck and stunned by her audacity almost.
right.
Um, and every time I saw that, it's the only thing I noticed about her.
Mm,
At other times, I would, to write answers to pass examinations, I would notice the bangles, up till
right.
here. But otherwise, it's just that. And then I realized that every time I see this image, the refrain, the thought that acts as a refrain is the hand of the waist. So
Right.
that became a refrain in the poem. Could I have written that as an essay? Someone else would, and I'm
Right.
sure many people have, but I wouldn't be able to, because it you said brevity. The thoughts that are there in the poem, that the thoughts that came to me could only work when they are placed
Ah,
side by side or arranged in a particular manner in verse.
right.
In the essay, I would not be able to prove anything. I was
No,
still
this
an
is
employee of the argumentative essay then, I think.
right. No, this is an extraordinary piece of writing. I said it even when you first wrote it. I did a little sketch, you might remember.
I remember.
Maybe
Yes, I
someday
do.
I'll draw it as a painting, but it only a true poet would have taken the view that you did. And I say this as someone who has written poetry in Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati since the age of 13. But I'm a mechanical poet in the sense, uh, if I've written, say, 1,000 pieces, you wouldn't find a single one that really represents me in any sense of the word. It does not capture my emotions because I don't have any. But when someone else reads it, it strikes a chord. I can say it because I have now enough evidence from Facebook posting that people warm up to it. So I suppose it's working. But in your case, I could see that when you saw that girl, I'm presuming it would have been an instant process for you to produce what you produced. Is that right?
Uh, I can't really remember, but I remember that phrase, her
Hmm.
hand at the waist.
Right.
I knew that that was going to be the axis of
Yeah.
the poem,
Yeah.
just as it was the axis of the visual image for me.
Right.
It for me, if her hand had not been at the waist, it would not have made an impact. I'm sure not on me, not on Mortimer or Mortimer, or I don't know how
Right.
to pronounce his name, the
Right.
archaeologist. Yeah, so that was how it came to me. And then that idea that every time I encountered it, that same thought came back to me, the reverberation of that.
Right.
So that became the refrain in the poem. I'm so
Well,
touched that you remember.
this has been as stimulating, remarkable as I had expected. I want to thank you for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you
I
did too.
love speaking to you, Mayank. I really did. Big hug
Oh,
to
how
you
nice.
and thank